Hey guys, welcome back to another cult movie review with me, Bo, here on the Film Scene Investigation channel. Hope everyone out there is doing good. In today's video, I'm going to be checking out the 1976 John Carpenter film, Assault on Precinct 13. Before we get into it, guys, as always, if you haven't already, please do consider subscribing to the channel. All the support is greatly appreciated. So, Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976 was written and directed by the legendary John Carpenter in his second feature film. Starring a relatively unknown cast, this was a low-budget production with Carpenter having full creative control. Now, John Carpenter is a director who I'm very familiar with, having seen many of his films over the years, with Assault on Precinct 13 being one of my favourites. I mean, when I was a kid, first getting into films, I was a big fan of the horror genre. So yeah, I saw a lot of John Carpenter material. Through my love of the Halloween franchise, I ended up exploring many of John Carpenter's films, including They Live and The Fog. He's a great director, but as time has gone on, I feel his work has been rather poor. I mean, I don't want to criticize Carpenter too much because, you know, he's a legend in the game. But yeah, I just can't lie and say that his later work was anything decent. I still rate Carpenter quite highly as a director, but I just prefer his early material. It was far superior. So my first exposure to Assault on Precinct 13 was actually when I saw a John Carpenter documentary on TV. There were clips of the film inserted into the documentary itself, and yeah, I remember seeing the footage and it definitely caught my eye. Soon after that, I ended up purchasing the DVD, and yeah, I've been a fan ever since. As for the movie itself, we followed the officer Ethan Bishop, who was played by actor Austin Stoker, who was patrolling the increasingly violent streets of Los Angeles. At the start of the film, Bishop was tasked to supervise an old decommissioned police precinct during its last remaining hours before its closure. I mean, yeah, Bishop wasn't exactly thrilled with the idea of manning an empty police precinct, but he had no other choice. When he arrived, Bishop met the remaining staff who were busy packing up boxes. While it's not necessarily a glamorous job, it wasn't exactly a challenge for Bishop, leading him to believe that he was in for a very uneventful night. Yet, soon after Bishop's arrival, things went awry when a police bus carrying some prisoners pulled up outside the precinct. One of the prisoners on the bus was sick, and the officers needed to use the precinct's holding cells while they called a doctor. Bishop was far from pleased, and yeah, who could blame him? I mean, the precinct wasn't exactly in any fit state to hold sick prisoners, but Bishop had no other choice and went along with the request. Dealing with sick prisoners was the least of Bishop's worries, as he was soon confronted with a traumatized man called Mr. Lawson, who rushed in to the precinct. Mr. Lawson, who was played by actor Martin West, collapsed at the front desk, needed immediate attention. So panicked and in a state of shock, Lawson was unable to articulate. He was unable to explain the situation. Soon the lights were shut off, and so began the attack by the street thugs outside. So at the start of the film, we saw a bunch of heavily armed LAPD officers ambush a group of notorious gangsters. This group were a bunch of dangerous criminals who had recently stolen a large number of rifles, so the LAPD weren't taking them lightly. The deadly shootout that we saw so briefly at the start of the film only led to more problems for the police, as rival gangs decided to come under one umbrella and vowed to take revenge on the citizens and the authorities. I mean, there was no messing around with these guys. They made a blood pact. Together, they were going to cause chaos for everyone. The remainder of the film then focused on the gang's vicious attack and Bishop's attempts to save everyone. Bullets were flying everywhere. Windows had been blown out. I mean, things got so bad that Bishop needed the help of the prisoners who were inside the holding cells. While it was a pretty drastic measure to take, I mean, the shooting was relentless, and yeah, I mean, there was just no way that Bishop could cope by himself. It was a huge gamble, but it was a risk that Bishop had to take. So he, prisoners Wilson and Wells, and the office secretary together killed and wounded dozens of gang members who attempted to force their way into the building. While they were initially successful, the gang members just kept coming. I mean, it was like a conveyor belt of street trash just showing up ready to kill. With little ammunition left, the group decided to retreat into the downstairs basement, where the prisoner Wilson and the officer Bishop did their best to force the gang members back. Now, I have to say that this was a very ambitious project for Carpenter to undertake, given he had so little experience at the time with directing large productions. I was impressed with the film's overall look. I mean, there's no denying that this is a very well-made movie. The cinematography was top-notch, and we also saw some very innovative visuals used in the film. For example, the POV shot looking down the gun viewfinder. You had these gang members driving around with their guns stuck out of the window, scoping out the citizens that walked by. I mean, these were innocent people, and they had no idea that they were literally milliseconds away from being killed. It was a great idea from Carpenter, and I think, we kind of take that shot for granted now. That's a shot that we would kind of expect to see, but for its time, it was very impressive. I also want to take a moment and mention the film's brilliant soundtrack, which was also produced by John Carpenter. While Carpenter is and should be celebrated for his achievements in film, we should also praise him for his great work as a composer. Over the years, Carpenter, as a composer, has delivered some solid material for his films, and Assault on Precinct 13 was no different. I mean, how about the film's main title? It was such a simple yet memorable piece of music that really heightened the film's mood and atmosphere. It was like this electronic bass or something like that, like do 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 do. The rest of the soundtrack was a combination of synthesizers and electronic drums, which really set it apart from other soundtracks at the time. It was a really great soundtrack, and if you're interested in John Carpenter's music, I would definitely recommend it. The only thing that surprised me was that the soundtrack wasn't officially released until 2003, which was, I believe, 27 years after the film was released in theatres. In terms of performances, I thought the actor Austin Stoker did a wonderful job in his role as Ethan Bishop. Now, I'm not too familiar with Stoker's work as an actor, but regardless, he delivered a strong and compelling performance. I also want to take a quick moment just to acknowledge how the Bishop character was a positive role model for black men. Bishop was a strong-minded and caring officer who just wanted to preserve law and order. I loved the Bishop character, and I thought it was a good thing portraying such a positive image to black audiences. Having rewatched this movie again recently, it just made me think about Hollywood and how Hollywood has kind of eroded this positive image over the years and replaced it with ghettoism. Nowadays, some people out there, especially people with the woke mindset, would view the character Bishop as an Uncle Tom, when in reality, he was just a man with common sense and integrity. I miss these types of role models, and I wish we would see more Ethan Bishop type characters in cinema today. I thought actress Laurie Zimmerman was a standout in her role as the secretary. She too is an actress who I'm not too familiar with, but I was impressed with her delivery in the film. The secretary, Lee, was a woman who could definitely handle herself, and she certainly played her part in taking out the bad guys. She wasn't this damsel in distress, and I'm glad she wasn't, because I think that would have kind of ruined the group's dynamic. And having looked at Zimmerman's profile, I am surprised that she never went on to have a more prolific film career. I say that because she was really good in the film, and I'm just surprised that I haven't seen her in other films. And so, dislikes for Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976. My biggest dislike for the film would have to be Mr. Lawson's actions after his daughter was killed. So, a bit of context here. Mr. Lawson and his daughter were travelling at the start of the film, and they got lost and stopped for directions. The father and daughter travelled to the wrong part of town where the street gangs roamed freely. Anyways, the daughter, Kathy, who was played by actress Kim Richards, ended up getting shot by one of the gang members. This was undoubtedly the most shocking moment within the film, seeing an innocent child gunned down like that. I mean, the scene itself actually caused a lot of controversy when the film was released, and I believe was heavily edited on some VHS releases. While it was indeed a disturbing sight to see, I personally didn't have any issues with the child dying, as it showed how savage the street gang were. My issue was with the aftermath, once Lawson had discovered his daughter had died. Lawson, quite rightly, broke down in tears at the sight of his daughter's lifeless body, but he quickly grabbed a gun and chased after the street gang responsible. I expected Lawson to remain in a state of shock, but he soon went all gung-ho and decided to avenge his daughter's death. You know, in some ways, yeah, I can kind of understand the reaction, but I just felt it all happened way too fast. The rapid turn from sadness to anger felt a little too forced and unrealistic. I also have to question why Lawson left his daughter's body at the side of the road. Now, a lot of you guys watching this may be thinking this is such a non-point, and hey, that's fair enough, but for me, it's always bugged me that Lawson could just drive off, leaving his daughter behind. I thought it was a bit overdramatic seeing this guy, this dad, suddenly grab a gun and chase after the street scum responsible. But, I can look past that. But the disregard to Kathy's body just was overkill for me. I don't know. I've never been in a situation like that, nor would I want to be. But for me, it would have made more sense if Lawson had picked up his daughter's body and put it in the car with him before driving off to chase the bad guys. And so, ratings for Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976. My rating will be a solid 5.5 out of 10. I found Assault on Precinct 13 to be a very well made and intense crime drama that really showcased Carpenter's ability as a filmmaker. When you break it down and consider the budget that Carpenter was working with, I mean, Assault on Precinct 13 is actually a very impressive effort by Carpenter. The director proved that you didn't need a lot of money to deliver a good movie. And as much as I personally love many of John Carpenter's horror films, I do wish that he had made more gritty crime dramas like Assault on Precinct 13. With that said, I guess you could kind of argue that this movie still had a horror element to it, but instead of a singular figure like a Michael Myers, there was a much more terrifying prospect of a non-stop horde of faceless street thugs ready to kill everyone in sight. If you're a fan of John Carpenter's work and you haven't seen this one yet, definitely make time because it is well worth the watch. And for those who have seen it, I'd recommend going back and revisiting this one because, yeah, it is a real cult classic that's worth your time. This is one of his strongest films. I prefer this over films like The Fog, Big Trouble in Little China, Prince of Darkness. They're all good films, but Assault on Precinct 13 is far superior to that. And well, that's all from me today, guys. I hope you've enjoyed this review of Assault on Precinct 13 from 1976. I will be back next week as always. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and of course, take care.